The black silence of deep space was suddenly broken by a glimmer of orange and red. A ship far larger than a city block drifted without control, its metal skin torn and glowing, fire spilling out of its wounds as if the stars themselves had caught it in their grasp. The ship carried passengers, but not warriors or soldiers. It carried children, young ones of the alien race who had been on a voyage of learning and culture, a journey meant to show them the wonders of their galaxy. What was meant to be a celebration of their future had turned into a nightmare when an unseen enemy struck the vessel, leaving it crippled and broken. Inside the vessel, smoke filled the air. The alien children cried for help, their fragile voices muffled by sealed doors and heavy walls. Their species were never built for such hostile conditions. Their lungs burned in the smoke, their slender arms too weak to push open the heavy panels that trapped them. The fire grew, sparks and explosions, echoing like thunder across the empty corridors. A short distance away, a small human craft floated. The pilot inside was a man named Daniel. He was not a soldier of rank, not a commander of fleets. He was a simple human pilot traveling along a trade route when the distress call broke through the static of his console. The message was desperate, filled with fear, and the words that repeated over and over were clear. Children. Save the children. Daniel adjusted his seat and stared at the glowing shape of the burning ship in the distance. His mind told him the truth of what he saw. That vessel was doomed. It could explode at any moment, and anyone who entered it risked death. He thought of the many reasons to stay back. He was alone, his craft was small, and no one would judge him if he turned away. Yet he could not push away the image of children trapped inside, frightened, waiting for someone who might never come. His breath grew heavy as he made his decision. He pushed the thrusters forward, guiding his ship closer to the burning vessel. The closer he came, the clearer the sound of the cries on the comm system grew. He could hear the frightened voices, the sharp alarms of failing systems, the metallic groans of the ship splitting apart. He clenched his fists and forced his mind to focus. He had no armor, no advanced weapons, only the strength of his body and the determination in his heart. Daniel guided his craft to a docking hatch that still flickered with weak power. Sparks flew as he attached the lock and forced the systems to engage. He pulled on his breathing mask, checked the emergency oxygen tanks, and grabbed the few tools he had. His ship shuddered under the heat from the burning vessel, but he ignored the warnings on his screen. He told himself again that he could not turn back now. The hatch opened with a hiss, releasing a cloud of smoke that rushed into his small craft. The heat was overwhelming as he stepped onto the alien ship. The corridor before him was broken and twisted, flames licking at the walls, smoke filling every inch of the air. The lights above flickered like dying stars. Each step he took echoed with urgency as he searched for the source of the cries. He found the first group of children in a compartment that had locked itself to protect against the fire. The panel was sealed, the door glowing from the heat outside. Through a small transparent slot, Daniel saw their faces. Their skin was pale and smooth, their large dark eyes filled with fear. They banged weakly on the glass, calling out in their own language, but even without translation he understood their plea. Daniel dropped his tools on the floor and forced the emergency lever, but it did not move. The ship's systems had failed. He braced his shoulders against the door and pushed with all his strength. Metal groaned, but did not yield. His lungs burned from the smoke, his muscles strained, and his breath came out in heavy gasps. Yet he remembered their faces and pushed harder. Finally, the seal cracked. With one final shout, he tore the door open enough for the children to crawl out. They rushed to him, clinging to his legs, their cries soft but desperate. He bent down, lifting the smallest into his arms, guiding the others with his voice and gestures. He carried them through the corridor, ignoring the flames that licked at his boots. He led them back toward the docking hatch and into his shuttle, placing them gently inside. The children huddled together, trembling but alive. Daniel knew his task was far from over. The distress calls still rang through the corridors. More children were trapped deeper in the ship. The vessel shook violently, warning of an explosion building inside its core. He could feel the time slipping away, every second pushing him closer to failure, yet he could not stop. He turned back toward the burning hallways, his eyes fierce with determination. He would save them all, or he would not leave at all. The fire roared louder as he moved forward, smoke cutting his vision and heat pressing against his skin. Sparks rained from the ceiling, debris fell across his path, but he pressed on. He thought, not of his own safety, but of the small voices waiting for someone to open the doors and carry them to life. The alien children were not his kind, not his people, but to Daniel they were innocent lives no different from human children. In his heart, he knew this truth. If he had the strength to act, then he had the duty to act. He whispered to himself through the mask, reminding himself of that single truth as he entered deeper into the fire, searching for the next group of children. And so, in the burning corridors of an alien ship abandoned by its enemies, with the silence of the stars outside and the fire of death inside, a lone human stepped forward. His body was small compared to the scale of the disaster, yet his courage was vast enough to challenge the flames. The children's cries guided him, and in that moment, Daniel was no longer just a pilot of a passing vessel. He was their only hope. Daniel moved deeper into the burning corridors of the alien ship. The sound of metal straining filled the air like the groans of a dying beast. Each step felt heavier as the smoke thickened around him, stinging his eyes and clawing at his lungs even through the mask. His heart beat hard in his chest, not from fear but from the drive that kept him moving forward. Behind him, a group of children sat safe in his shuttle, their small faces pressed against the window as they waited for him. That thought gave him strength. He could not stop now. The fire roared as another section of ceiling fell in front of him. He shielded his head. With his arm, sparks landing on his jacket, burning tiny holes into the fabric. He brushed them off and climbed over the fallen metal. His boots slipped against the heat, but he pushed forward. In the distance he heard more cries. The sound cut through the chaos, high-pitched and filled with fear. His pulse quickened. He followed the sound, weaving through hallways that had become like mazes, corridors twisting with debris and darkness. He found another sealed compartment, the lights flickering weakly inside. Through the smoky glass he saw several children pressed against the door. Their eyes were wide with terror, their hands beating against the surface, their voices trembling. Daniel pressed his palm against the glass to show them he was there. Their movements stopped for a moment, hope flashing across their faces. He raised his tool and struck at the lock. The sparks flew, but the door refused to move. He tried the emergency lever, but it was jammed, twisted from the heat. He set his shoulder against the door once again and pushed with all his strength. His muscles burned, his teeth clenched, and his boots dug into the floor. The door groaned but held fast. He stepped back, breathing hard, sweat rolling down his face inside the mask. His mind raced. If he wasted too much time here, the fire might consume the ship completely. Then he saw a panel on the wall beside the door. He ripped it open with his hands, wires spilling out. He remembered enough about ship systems to know what to do. Pulling out his small cutter, he sparked the wires together, forcing the lock to release. A sharp hiss rang out and the door slid open halfway. Without waiting, he pulled it wide with his bare hands until there was just enough space for the children to crawl through. They rushed out, coughing from the smoke, clinging to him in fear. Daniel bent down and lifted one onto his shoulders, guiding the others with his arms. They followed him down the corridor, stumbling on their thin legs, their small frames struggling against the heat and smoke. He encouraged them with his voice, calm but firm, telling them to keep moving, keep breathing, stay close. His words were simple and steady, giving them the strength they needed. The path back to his shuttle was longer this time. The ship shook violently as another explosion rattled its frame. The sound of tearing metal echoed through the halls. He knew the core was weakening. He had little time left. Still, he pressed forward, guiding the children through flames and falling beams. Twice he threw himself against debris to clear their path. His body bruised and scraped, but he did not stop. When they reached the shuttle, the first group of children cried out with relief, pulling the new arrivals inside. Daniel placed the one on his shoulders down gently and counted each of them. More lives saved, more hope secured. Yet as he looked back into the burning ship, he still heard the faint echoes of voices deeper within. The distress signal had not stopped, the cries had not faded. There were still more trapped inside. He could feel exhaustion pulling at his muscles, the weight of smoke heavy in his lungs. His mask beeped, warning that oxygen was running low. Logic told him to stop, to take what he had saved and leave before the ship tore itself apart. But his heart did not listen to logic. He looked at the children huddled inside the shuttle, their wide eyes watching him, their small hands gripping his sleeves as if begging him not to leave again. He placed his hand on the nearest shoulder, gave them a reassuring nod, and turned back into the flames. The deeper he went, the worse the destruction became. Entire sections of the hallway had collapsed, leaving only narrow gaps to crawl through. Fire licked across the walls like living creatures. He dragged himself under broken beams, his uniform scorched by the heat. He ignored the pain, forcing himself forward with the thought that somewhere ahead more young lives were waiting. Finally, he reached another compartment. This one was worse than the others. The smoke inside was so thick he could barely see the figures huddled near the back. The door had jammed completely, warped by the heat. He slammed his fists against it, shouted through his mask to let them know he was there. Their faint cries answered. He needed to break it open, but his tools were nearly spent. He thought fast. Looking around, he saw a pipe jutting from the wall. He pulled it loose with all his strength, sparks and steam spraying around him. With the pipe as a lever, he jammed it into the doorframe and forced it open, inch by inch. His arms shook, his back screamed with pain, but slowly the gap widened. When it was finally enough, he dropped the pipe and reached in with his hands, dragging the first child out. The others followed, stumbling and coughing. This group was larger, weaker, and terrified beyond reason. Daniel carried two at once, one in each arm, guiding the rest with his voice. The corridor back seemed endless, every step a battle against collapsing metal and rising flames. He could feel the weight of the children pulling at him, yet his will did not falter. He thought of his own childhood, of what it would mean if no one had come for him. That memory gave him strength to keep moving. The ship groaned louder than ever, a deep sound that told him it was only minutes from total collapse. He staggered forward, lungs on fire, body shaking, carrying the children as if his life depended on theirs. When the shuttle finally came into sight, the relief in his heart was overwhelming. The children inside cheered as he brought the new group aboard. He set them down carefully, making sure each was alive, each breathing, each safe. Leaned against the wall of the shuttle, his chest heaving, his vision blurred from exhaustion. He had saved many, but he knew the cries had not yet ended. Somewhere even deeper, perhaps in the heart of the ship, there were still more waiting. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his choice pressing on him. He could stay and survive with those he had already rescued, or he could risk everything one last time to save the rest. Daniel looked at the children gathered around him, their innocent eyes filled with trust, And in that moment, he knew his answer. He would not leave while even one remained trapped. With a final breath, he turned once more toward the flames, ready to face the most dangerous rescue yet. Daniel pushed himself once more into the burning ship, even though every muscle in his body screamed for rest. The oxygen in his tank was dropping, and his hands were scraped and bleeding from tearing through metal. Yet his mind held only one thought. Somewhere inside this collapsing giant more children were trapped, and they were waiting for him. He could hear them faintly, voices trembling, like whispers in the fire. Each sound guided him deeper into the wreck. The hallway ahead had collapsed almost completely. Smoke pressed like a wall, and flames raged as if alive, clawing at him with every step. He crawled under a fallen beam, the heat burning his arms as he pulled himself through. His mask beeped again, warning that the air was growing thinner. His lungs burned, but he forced himself to move faster. He reached a heavy bulkhead, and behind it he heard the faintest sound of crying. That sound gave him strength. The bulkhead was locked tight. He tried the lever, but it would not move, twisted by the fire. He set his back against the door and pushed with all he had, but the metal held. Sweat dripped into his eyes. The mask felt heavy against his face, and still the door stood in his way. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the frightened faces of the children he had already saved. He thought of them waiting inside his shuttle, trusting him, believing he would not abandon the others. That memory lit a fire in his chest, far stronger than the one around him. He looked again at the door and spotted a crack at its base. Dropping to his knees, he forced his fingers into the gap and pulled. Pain shot through his arms as the jagged edges cut into his skin, but he did not let go. His teeth clenched, and his muscles screamed as slowly, inch by inch, the gap widened. With a final roar, he dragged the door open, just enough to squeeze inside. The sight that met him broke his heart. At least a dozen children huddled together in the smoke-filled room, their thin bodies shaking, their large dark eyes filled with tears. Some were too weak to stand, others clutched each other in terror. When they saw Daniel enter, hope returned to their faces. They reached out their small arms toward him, their voices rising in weak cries. He dropped to the floor beside them, pulling two into his arms at once, whispering through the mask that they were safe now. He checked quickly, but the walls of the room were already glowing red from the fire outside. He knew they had only minutes before the entire section collapsed. He lifted as many as he could carry and gestured for the stronger ones to follow. With one child over his shoulders and another in his arms, he moved back toward the corridor. The way back was worse than before. The fire raged higher, beams fell with thunderous crashes, and the ship groaned like it was tearing itself apart. His boots slipped on the heated floor. His arms ached from carrying the children, yet he did not stop. Every step was a battle, every breath a struggle, but he pressed on with the thought that each child he carried was a life that would not end. Here in fire and smoke, halfway back another explosion shook the ship, and the corridor ahead collapsed. Flames blocked the path entirely. For a moment despair touched him, but then he looked at the terrified faces clinging to his arms and shoulders. Giving up was not an option. He turned down a side passage he had not explored before. The walls here were darker, twisted, and the air even heavier with smoke, but he forced his way through. The passage led to a maintenance tunnel, narrow and filled with debris. He pushed the children ahead of him, guiding them through the tight space, whispering words of comfort to keep them moving. His own body barely fit through, his shoulders scraping against the walls, sparks cutting at his skin, but he kept crawling forward. The children's small hands reached out to him, trusting that he would not leave them behind. When at last the tunnel opened back into a corridor he recognized, he almost collapsed from relief. The path to his shuttle was near, though the floor trembled beneath his feet, and the ceiling above rained sparks. He staggered forward, carrying the children, guiding the rest with firm words. His vision blurred with smoke, his chest felt like fire. But the sight of the shuttle ahead kept him moving. The hatch stood open, and the children, inside, cried out in joy as they saw him emerge from the flames with the final group. Their voices gave him the last strength he needed. He carried the children inside one by one, setting them gently down. When the last child was safe within the shuttle, he dropped to his knees, his arms shaking violently from exhaustion. He could barely breathe, his mask beeping sharply as the oxygen reached its final limits. But there was no time to rest. The alien vessel shuddered with a final roar, the sound of its death cry echoing through the halls. Daniel staggered to his feet and pulled himself into the pilot seat of his small craft. His fingers moved clumsily over the controls, his body begging him to stop, yet he forced himself to focus. He released the docking clamps and fired the thrusters. The shuttle pulled away just as the alien vessel gave one final explosion. The light was blinding, a giant ball of fire consuming what remained of the ship. The blast wave rocked his shuttle, sending it tumbling, but he fought the controls until the ship steadied. When the light faded, all that was left was a cloud of glowing debris drifting silently through the void. Inside the shuttle, the children huddled together, their eyes wide with shock but their bodies safe. Some clung to each other, others cried softly, and a few reached out to Daniel, their small hands touching his arms as if to confirm that he was real. He looked back at them, his chest still heaving, his body broken with exhaustion, but his heart filled with relief. They were alive, every single one of them. For a long moment silence filled the shuttle, broken only by the sound of their soft breaths. Then one of the smallest children whispered a word in their language, a word Daniel did not understand, but whose meaning was clear. The others repeated it, their voices rising together. It was a word of gratitude, a word of hope, a word spoken to the human who had risked everything for them. Daniel leaned back in his seat, his eyes heavy with fatigue, and let out a long breath. The burning ship was gone, but the lives it carried now sat safely behind him. He had done what many would have called impossible. He had faced fire, smoke, and death itself, and he had carried every child to safety. As the shuttle drifted in the vast silence of space, Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The children were safe, but soon their people would come searching. And when they did, they would see who had saved their young. What would they think of a lone human who had done what no one else dared? The answer waited in the stars ahead. The shuttle drifted in space carrying the rescued children, its metal shell scarred from the heat of the burning vessel, yet inside, it was filled with quiet life and trembling breaths. Daniel sat at the controls, his hands heavy and his eyes blurred with exhaustion, but he forced himself to keep the ship steady. Behind him, the children huddled close together, whispering softly. In their own tongue, their large eyes fixed on the man who had carried them through fire. None of them had the strength to speak in detail, but they all knew the truth, that they lived because of him. Hours passed as the shuttle floated in silence, waiting for rescue. Daniel's body cried for rest, yet he stayed awake, his senses alert to every sound. At last the silence of the stars broke as shadows moved in the distance. Great ships of alien design approached, sleek and silver, their lights flashing like bright suns. They came in formation, powerful and proud, the guardians of the children's people. Daniel sent the signal beacon and leaned back, relief washing over him. The alien ships closed around his shuttle, their voices sharp and urgent over the comm system. At first they did not understand why a human vessel was here, why a single man carried their children. Suspicion filled their tones, but then they scanned the shuttle and saw the truth. Their children were alive, every one of them, rescued from the jaws of fire by the hands of a stranger. When the alien ships docked with his shuttle, the children rushed forward, their small hands reaching out to their guardians. Cries of joy echoed in the chamber as families reunited, tears shining in alien eyes that had feared their young were lost. Daniel stood to the side, weary and scarred, his uniform torn and his skin burned from his struggle. He felt like a shadow, watching a world not his own, yet the children would not let him fade. They clung to him, pulling him into the light, showing their people who had saved them. The aliens looked upon him with disbelief. Humans were known to them, but not for acts of great bravery. They were seen as young in the eyes of the galaxy, a species still learning, still stumbling. Yet here stood one of them, battered and scarred, yet unbroken, who had risked all for lives that were not his own. Word spread quickly, carried from ship to ship until the entire fleet knew of the human savior. Daniel was taken aboard the grandest of the vessels, a ship of immense beauty and power. Its hulls were tall and shining, carved with symbols of history, filled with light that seemed alive. At its heart was the throne chamber of the Queen, ruler of this people, mother in spirit to all children of her kind. She was tall and graceful, her presence filling the chamber like a rising sun, her eyes deep pools of wisdom and strength. Around her gathered nobles and leaders, all waiting to see this human who had walked through fire. When Daniel entered, escorted by guards, the chamber fell silent. The Queen's gaze fell upon him, studying the man who looked so small compared to the splendor of her hall. Yet her eyes did not see weakness. They saw the burns on his arms, the exhaustion in his steps, the quiet resolve in his face. She rose from her throne and stepped down to meet him, and all in the hall bowed their heads as she approached. The Queen spoke with a voice that carried across the chamber, strong yet gentle. She told all who listened what this human had done, how he had risked his life not once but many times, carrying their children through fire, refusing to rest until all were saved. She declared that courage such as his was rare even among her own people. Daniel stood silent, his head lowered, feeling the weight of her words. He had not acted for reward or glory. He had acted because it was right. Yet here he was, honored before an entire people. The Queen turned to him and asked what he wished in return for his deeds. Riches, power, recognition, anything within her reach could be his. Daniel raised his head slowly, meeting her gaze. His voice was quiet, but steady as he answered that he wanted nothing, that saving the children had been enough, that no reward was needed. The hall fell silent once more, for none expected such humility. The Queen studied him for a long moment, her eyes deep with thought, and then she smiled, a rare smile that lit the chamber. She declared that though he asked for nothing, he had earned something far greater than treasure or power. She would give him the sacred bond, a gift older than memory, a link that tied souls together beyond time and death. It was a bond never before offered to any outside her people, for it meant trust eternal, kinship unbroken, and the promise of unity. Gasps filled the hall as the nobles bowed low, for such a gift was sacred, a sign that he was no longer stranger, but family. Daniel did not understand at first, but the Queen explained. Through the sacred bond, he would be forever connected to her and to her people. Their memories would flow into him, their songs would live in his heart, their children would always know his name. It was the highest honor they could give, not as ruler to servant, but as kin to kin. Daniel's breath caught as he realized the weight of her words. He had saved lives and in return had been offered a place among them, a place no human had ever been given. The Queen extended her hand, glowing with soft light. Daniel hesitated, unsure if he was worthy of such a gift, but then he thought of the children's eyes, of their trust, of the way they had clung to him even in the fire. He stepped forward and took her hand. The chamber filled with a light that seemed to come from the stars themselves. Energy flowed through him, warm and endless, carrying visions of their history, their struggles, their hopes. He felt himself woven into something vast and eternal, no longer alone, no longer just human. When the light faded, the hall erupted with voices of praise. The Queen stood beside him, her hand still in his, and declared that humanity was now kin to her people. From this day forward, no wall would stand between them. Daniel stood humbled, his heart heavy with the bond now within him, knowing his life had changed forever. That night the children he had saved gathered around him once more. They touched his hands, his arms, whispering words of thanks. Their voices were soft, yet filled with trust and love. Daniel sat among them, no longer feeling like an outsider. He had walked into fire as a stranger, but now he sat as family. The stars outside shone brighter than ever, and Daniel knew this was not the end, but the beginning of something greater. The bond tied him to a people beyond his own, and through that bond the future of both races would forever be changed. Hall of the alien palace had fallen quiet after the light of the sacred bond faded. The nobles whispered among themselves, voices filled with awe, for they knew history had just been written. A human stood among them not as guest or stranger, but as one of their own. Daniel still felt the energy flowing through his veins like a living river, carrying images and memories that were not his yet belonged to him now. He saw visions of stars long dead, battles fought by ancestors, songs sung in voices unlike any human tongue, yet filled with meaning he understood. It was overwhelming and humbling all at once. The Queen stood beside him with calm grace, her presence radiant. She looked upon him not as ruler to subject, but as equal in spirit. She declared before all that this human had earned more than gratitude. He had earned kinship, and through him the first bridge between their people and humanity had been built. Her voice carried through the chamber like music, and those gathered bowed their heads, not in obedience, but in respect. Daniel lowered his own head, unsure if he deserved such honor, but the children saved by his hands broke the silence with laughter and joy. Rushing to his side, they gathered around him, climbing into his arms, holding his hands, their voices calling him protector in their language. Daniel could not speak their words perfectly, yet through the bond he understood their meaning. They were no longer afraid, no longer lost, for they had someone who had carried them through fire. Their joy filled the chamber with light stronger than any torch. Even the stern nobles smiled as they watched their children cling to him. Days passed and Daniel remained among them. He was given a chamber within the royal vessel, not as prisoner, but as honored guest. Everywhere he walked eyes followed him, curious and respectful. Some whispered in wonder at his courage, others bowed slightly as he passed. But Daniel himself lived simply as always, spending most of his time with the children, helping them recover from fear, playing small games, telling them stories of Earth and human childhood. They listened with bright eyes, their laughter echoing through the halls. To them he was not legend, but family, someone who knelt on the floor to tie their shoes or carried them on his shoulders, so they could reach the high windows to see the stars. The Queen herself came often to speak with him. Their bond allowed her to share thoughts and feelings beyond words. She asked him why he had risked so much when he could have fled. His answer was simple, spoken without pride. Because they were children, and because they needed him. To him it had never been a question of who they were, only that they were innocent lives worth saving. The Queen listened and her eyes shone with quiet respect, for she saw truth in his heart. Soon a great ceremony was held across the empire. Messages were sent to every world under the Queen's rule, telling the story of the human who had saved their young. Songs were written, banners flown, and his image carried in glowing light across cities of crystal and stone. He had become a symbol not only of courage but of unity. Many who had once doubted humanity now saw hope in them, for if one human could act with such strength and selflessness, then perhaps others could too. Daniel stood before the crowds during the ceremony, the children by his side. He did not seek attention. His shoulders were heavy with modesty, yet he could not deny the warmth in his heart as he saw countless faces looking to him with gratitude. The queen spoke to the people, her words ringing clear. She said that the bond given to this man was not just his alone, but a bond extended to all of humanity. She declared that from this day forward humans would be treated as kin, not strangers, for their courage had proven worthy. In that moment, Daniel felt the weight of what he had done. He had not only saved lives but had changed the fate of his species. What began as one man refusing to turn away had become a story that united two peoples across the stars. He thought back to the moment he had first seen the burning ship, the moment he could have chosen safety. If he had turned away, that day, none of this would exist. The thought humbled him deeply. After the ceremony, life returned to quiet. Daniel prepared to return to his own world, yet part of him felt reluctant. The bond tied him to these people in a way that could never be broken. The children begged him to stay longer, their voices soft, but filled with love. The queen herself told him he would always have a place among them, that he could return whenever he wished, that the bond made him family. Daniel promised he would not forget them, and that humanity would one day stand beside them, not as strangers, but as brothers and sisters. As his small shuttle prepared to leave, the children crowded the viewing deck, pressing their hands against the glass to wave. Their voices carried through the cum system, calling his name, wishing him safe journey. Daniel lifted his hand in return, his throat tight with emotion. The queen's voice also reached him, calm and steady, telling him that his courage had given hope to both their peoples. He bowed his head in respect and promised he would honor the bond always. The shuttle rose into the star-filled sky, engines glowing, carrying him back toward human space. Inside the cabin, Daniel sat quietly, staring at the endless horizon of light and darkness. He felt the bond within him like a second heartbeat, warm and eternal, a reminder that he was no longer just one man drifting alone. He was part of something larger, a bridge between worlds, a guardian remembered not only by those he had saved, but by an entire civilization. The memory of the burning ship would never fade, nor the cries of the children trapped in smoke and fire, nor the way they had clung to him when he carried them out. Yet alongside those memories now lived the sound of their laughter, the glow of their smiles, the promise of a future brighter than the flames of destruction. He had faced death with nothing but his will, and in doing so, he had found life not only for them but for himself. As the stars stretched before him, Daniel knew his journey was not finished. The sacred bond would guide him in the days ahead, reminding him that even a single act of courage could change the fate of many. He was not a soldier, not a king, not a man of great power. He was simply human, yet in his humanity lay a strength no fire could consume, and so his story closed not in silence, but in promise. The promise that when the galaxy remembered the day the children were saved from the burning ship, they would also remember the human who stood alone against the fire, and who through his courage earned the trust of a queen and the eternal bond of a people. His name would be spoken across stars, not as legend far removed, but as protector, as brother, as human. The end.